Do you think most people at some point come to terms with their own mortality?
I think that there are a number of factors that either help or alienate a person from accepting. I think in our culture we don't do a very good job of being with death, and we certainly don't do a very good job of being with those who are dying. Most of us don't even ask ourselves, we don't talk about when we die, we talk about if we die. So we ourselves haven't done much thought, given much thought to that. I think I've been with thousands of people as they died, and what they've taught me is that it isn't imminent death per se that they're most afraid of. It is the experience of being abandoned, of being alone with the inevitability of their passage. And if we help people to help others, they're much more accepting of what is inevitable.
When you say they fear being alone, could you elaborate?
They don't fear the pain associated with death as much as they fear the pain of being left alone with it. So families who don't touch, families who don't talk, families who don't participate exacerbate the fear and the anxiety of the dying person. If we can change that in our culture, we can change the experience of how a person goes toward their death. So families that do participate, whether it's through hospice or talking about the experience, in other words, just asking open questions. What is it like for you today? Even the question that sounds stupid at the outset of, what's the hardest part for you about dying? That opens up the experiencing of companioning, and that is what the dying want the most. And if we can do that, we change their fear and we change their anxiety.
Now, Allan, I know you have also talked with a number of people who are in the process of dying. Is fear pretty much commonplace? I mean, does pretty much everyone fear death?
I think fear is an element in most people's experience of dying. But it is more common in people in midlife. That's been my experience. The very old, the old, and ironically children seem to be less anxious about that. But I agree with Lani's observation about fear of abandonment and vulnerability. That is a very common fear. The problem when you look at the literature on the fear of death and you review it very carefully, it falls apart in your hands. And it falls apart in your hands precisely at the point where you ask, what is it about death people fear? And that is a black hole, a bag that has a lot of different things in it. It could be fear of choking. It could be fear of ghosts. It could be fear of meeting your dead mother-in-law again. It could be, it's a whole range of fears when you unpack it. So when you start unpacking fear of death, it's often the fears that you carry around about life that somehow ending it seems to raise.
Well, I was surprised that you didn't say fear that it just all ends, that there's nothing that comes after that. I mean, sort of that kind of primal existential panic.
In my experience, that hasn't been a big one, but it's there. It's there. I mean, the one thing that's important, and I'll say this at the outset as a sociologist, is the key thing here is diversity. Diverse social circumstances, diverse cultural, ethnic, racial, and religious experience. That's really important to get your head around with all of this discussion. I wrote a paper just recently on the issue about companioning at death, and there's no doubt that I think the vast majority of people don't want to die alone. But increasingly, all over the world, in the United States and in Europe and in Britain, there is a small group of people who really don't want to die with anyone. Thank you very much. They'd like to die at home alone. And
alone? Not even
alone.
With family members?
No, not with anyone, preferably alone. And there was an interesting case of a woman, a case study in Britain of a woman who was 92 who'd had a heart attack and was admitted to emergency, and she was very keen to sign herself out, and they said, "Well, madam, if you sign yourself out, you could die." Imagine saying that to a 92-year-old. "Madam, you could die." I'm not sure who the news was for. And she thought this was outrageous, and she left, caught a bus, went home, and promptly died there. And she was clearly happy to do that. There is a small group of people for whom, and you see this all the time, people who die alone at home and are found some days, sometimes weeks, and in the case of Britain, there have been celebrated cases where bodies have been found a couple of years after. Now, some of those things are failures in the health services and failures of community care, but others are not. Others are clearly, and this is a growing number, I suspect, of people who wish to live their lives independently and to go that way, and for which dying alone is representative of a kind of resistance and a dissent to companioning. Mm-hmm. So although companioning is incredibly important, I think it's really important to understand the diversity in people's views about this.